Jeanne and Linda McDonald founded Persons Against Non-State Torture, a campaign to gain human rights and legal equity for women and girls who were victimized by non-state torture, trafficked to like-minded others, and including buyers and pornographers within organized local, national, and international criminal networks. So Jeanne and Linda, can you please come up and present your report?
Thank you.
It was 1993.
Yeah. Okay, I have 2 pages here. They started 20 pages, so they're down to 10 pages. So just to make sure that I stay on, we had 5 minutes. Lori said 5 minutes, so we'll try to do that, each of us. So the question was, how do I speak truth to power? So I decided to start with this story about, in asking you to imagine Evelina carrying her 6-month-old baby up a country road hill. And accompanying her was a 3.5-year-old daughter who was telling her mother not to go up the hill. She didn't want this to happen because she knew her father was at the top of the hill. This little girl knew that her father wanted her mother back, but she also knew that her mother had fled her father because of the violence. So when they got to the top of the hill, the father brought out a little doll. The little girl knew that was a bride, but it wasn't going to work. She kept speaking her truth to power, to the relational abuse of power between her, her mother, and her father. This little girl was me. Now I share this "How do you speak truth to power" story because it demands us to free think who speaks truth to power. Young children are rarely or ever asked to identify their ability to speak their truth to power, to relational abuse of power, and nor are they afforded the dignity to be heard. So as I aged, I also learned that I developed a very important skill on that hilltop, and that was not to internalize the violence of my father or the violence of others. And as a woman, speaking truth to power, to abuse of power is complex. And actually, I'm learning tonight that my story is going to also show that it can expose corruption and impunity. Because I'm talking about the Mass Casualty Commission in Nova Scotia and their requirement to educate and study gender-based intimate partner violence. And it's already been mentioned, but I have a different story from what has already been mentioned. Because Linda and I brought in the issue, we were very active in the commission, about the issue that women and girls do suffer torture by non-state actors, which means family and others, traffickers and pornographers, for example. So I was engaged in many oral statements, and I shared that women had guns held to their head. They were electric shocked, they were water tortured, they were stripped naked, they were urinated and defecated on, they were torture raped in every orifice of their body with other objects and animals that satisfied the non-state torturer's pleasure. They also had forced pregnancies and forced abortions, even as young girls. So they had emotional terror and horror when they came to us to tell their stories. They were often speechless and defenseless. objectified as a piece of meat. So I spoke about feminism, I spoke about nursing science and other scientific evidence that we had, and that atrocities such as non-state torture are often referred to as acts of human evil. And this is how women often identified them. Then on March the 30th, 2023, Commissioners J. Michael McDonald, Leanne J. Fitch, and Dr. Kim Stanton released their final report, totally excluding, eliminating, and invisibilizing non-state torture as a form of gender-based violence against women and girls. So to speak truth to power, to abuse to power, does bring up the risk that you're going to show corruption and impunity. So as a consequence of their elimination of the truth, Linda and I sent them a feedback report exposing that although their messages, such as this one, stating our efforts must be to eradicate all forms of gender-based violence and its impact on all survivors. These were deceptive because the commissioners had discriminatorily negated Nova Scotian women and girls who had suffered non-state torture. Within hours of the commissioners' release of their final report, women who survived non-state torture contacted us, saying, for example, I wanted the commissioners to say I existed. So I am a person. I am nothing when made invisible. Women's responses were in the feedback report. The commissioners, we asked them to write an addendum identifying the non-state torture as a form of violence, apologizing to the women who were negated, and silence has been the response. So the mass casualty system betrayed my trust. I was deeply enraged then, and I still am, by their subjective abuse of power to destructively reject the human inclusiveness, the rights and dignity of the women and girls victimized. So re-speaking truth to power meant exposing how their policies and practices, and that's what I'm doing tonight, which I was not expecting. I would have already heard about the mass casualty of the commissions, resulting in the women knowing they were dehumanized, invisibilized, denied access to justice, and witnessing the impunity of the non-state torturers. The Commissioner's report is a national and an international resource, and truth-telling was corrupted because it made non-state torture of women and girls invisible, not only nationally, but internationally. So if you're inclined to be a bit of an activist, please just write to Sean Fraser, the Minister of Justice and the Attorney General of Canada, and tell them that you would like to have non-state torture incorporated into the Criminal Code of Canada as a torture crime, because it is not. The only perpetrators that can be accused and tried for torture are state actors, which are police or military, for example. So that is my story about telling truth to power.
So you're stuck with me as the last person. I just wanted to, before I start, Jeanne and I wrote our stories separately. We didn't know what we were going to say, and it's kind of eerie how we both started. I wanted to thank Lori, first of all, wherever you are, Lori, and Women's eNews for bringing us to this wonderful event, because Jeanne and I, we've struggled for 33 years to become visible, so this is an important moment for us. I want to thank the woman who nominated us, and most importantly, I want to thank the women who share their stories of non-state torture with us and trust and respect that we will give them dignity, and we try very hard to do that. So speaking truth to power, it's been the story of my life, really. I was a little 3-year-old girl. We didn't have TV. My mother listened to country music on the radio. I had no outside influences, really. My family were not close to, we were not geographically close to my extended family. And I was born into a family, just as Jeanne was, with a very violent, misogynistic man. And my first experiences of speaking truth to power was to my father when I was 3. I knew he was wrong, how he was beating my mother. I refused to pretend it didn't happen, and I challenged him until I left my home when I was 18 years old. I never stopped speaking truth to power to him. And I learned that it was me who taught that to myself, no one else. I didn't have a mentor. I didn't have any outside influence. I was my own teacher. And truth became my lifeline, and it still is today. I know no other way. It gets me in trouble, but it also gives me great quality of life. And I kept on speaking truth to power all through my childhood. I left the Catholic Church when I was 11 because of the contradictions I saw in the church. The priests and nuns came to my house, and I told them I wasn't going back. I spoke truth to power to bullies on the playground, stood up to other bullies who were beating children on the playground. I spoke truth to power in my nursing degree. I saw children who were labeled as mentally ill when they were really victims of violence, the same as I had been. And I challenged doctors and nurses not to send them back to those homes that had nothing to do with mental illness. And they listened. As a young student, they listened to me, which always makes me proud. Then when I met Jeanne, my grassroots activism became fully developed. We started a grassroots activist movement through Persons Against Non-State Torture, with the first woman being Sarah, who was born in Nova Scotia she was born in Newfoundland, but she moved to Nova Scotia. She was born into a family who tortured and trafficked her from the time she was a baby. She wasn't the first, she was the first, but she certainly wasn't the last that we heard the story from. We've heard the same stories from women all around the world. Thousands of women now, the same exact stories, variations of the same MO. So it's been quite a journey, because when you speak those type of truths, the truth of non-state torture, especially back in 1993, no one wanted to listen to us. They thought we were crazy. They thought we were exaggerating. They thought many things. But we kept doing it because hard things are hard. And the consequence of speaking truth to power, I speak to any young women or young men that are in the audience. I can't see you all exactly, but you're going to lose friends. I lost family. I became isolated in ways that I never expected. So you do lose things, but you gain things as well. You gain the sense of knowing that you're part of social transformation, that the world will be different if you keep standing and speaking. You gain your own personal growth and pride. And Jeanne and I have gained the pride of knowing and watching the support of women healing from non-state torture, and the beauty of that when people told us it was impossible. You gain connection with other truth tellers, and Jeanne and I are now connected to a global movement of Network Against Non-State Torture. We're having our first conference in Lisbon in November, and we have judges, Supreme Court judges, many lawyers that are working with us now. One lawyer in Paris who is representing 50 young women who were at the age of 13 and 14 tricked into pornography, and now in their mid-30s they're demanding it be known that they were tortured in the pornography, that it wasn't adult entertainment. Mm-hmm. So the movement is growing, and especially being, thank you. especially being a feminist, speaking truth to power, it gives its own risks and its own struggle. As we know, all roads lead to blaming feminists for everything nowadays. You know, and it's, yesterday we see with a young man, he was blaming feminists, not just hating women, but blaming feminists. And I know that as a feminist, I keep saying it over and over because I'm not going to be silent because I'm a feminist. So you have to have fortitude when you speak truth to power. You have to have humility. You have to be willing to step into the unknown. And you have to have a revolutionary spirit. And Jeanne and I both have a revolutionary spirit as nurses, because people don't ever think of us as being nurses. They don't think of nurses as being revolutionary. But I learned this year in the 1600s in London that when the scientific method was developed, there was many nurses, many women healers, many women called witches that wanted to be accepted in the scientific method, and they were blocked deliberately by physicians, 150 of them that lived in the city of London. And it was the men who developed the scientific method who really said that the nurses and the women healers, he would trust more than the physicians. So here we are, 400 years later, still fighting to be scientific, and Jeanne and I have written a book about the healing of non-state torture, and it is very scientific, and I use that word very deliberately. So my advice to anyone who has that fighting spirit is to never underestimate your power, and to remember never to underestimate the power of a little 3-year-old girl. Thank you.
Wonderful. Wow.